everyone, and welcome to session 3 of fractions. Today we're going to be looking at equivalent fractions. Equivalent or equal means the same. So equivalent fractions they are worth the same amount. So let's have a look. We have a half and we have 2/4. The column here asks us to shade each of these shapes to show a half, and this column asks us to shade each of the shapes to show 2/4. Now, if we revise what we've been talking about this week, the denominator tells us how many parts to split our shape in altogether, so 2 parts altogether, and the top number, the numerator, tells us how many to shade, so 1 part out of 2. So this diagram now shows a half. For 2/4, if I look at the denominator, I'm going to split this shape into 4 parts. And if I shade 2 parts, I do it like that. What do you notice? Pause the videotape and just talk to someone at home. What did you notice? Yeah, they are the same. They take up the same amount of space within the circle. They are equivalent. They are worth the same. So if I was to shade in the diagrams up here, if I shade in 1 out of 2 parts for a half, and I do the same for this shape, I shade 1/2, and I do the same for the circle at the bottom, 1/2. I could then shade in the 2/4, 1/4, 2/4, and we can see that the half takes up the same amount of space as 2/4. If I shade in 2/4 on the rectangle, a little bit harder to see because of course they have split the shape differently. But if I was to show you a rectangle split into quarters in a different way, so there is my shape. Oh, that's not very equal, is it? Oh, that's a bit better, a bit wonky. That one shows 1/2. If I split this shape differently into quarters, and I shaded 2/4 this time, you could see how they look to be equivalent. And then of course I've shaded a half of the circle at the bottom. If I shade 2/4, just like my example over here, we can see that they are the same. So equivalent fractions just mean that they are equal. They are equal in size. Now, the bottom question on the sheet is a little bit different. It's asking us, what is a half of 8 and what is 2/4 of 8? Now, we had a question similar to this yesterday, and I remember saying, I'm sure if I asked you what a half of 8 was, you'd all be able to tell me without having to work it out. A half of 8, of course, is 4. 2/4 of 8. Well, if I was to find 2/4 of something, 2/4 of 8, remember when we're finding a fraction of a number, we look at the denominator and we find out that it's 4. So we're going to draw 4 circles, and we're going to share our 8 between those 4 circles. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then we look at the numerator, and it's asking us how many are in 2 of those quarters, or how many are in 2 of those circles. So how many are there in 2 of those circles? 1, 2, 3, 4. The answer is 4. So it's the same, it's equivalent. So just like we've shown that a half of a shape is the same as 2/4 of a shape, a half of a number works out to be exactly the same answer as 2/4 of a number. So halves and 2/4 are equivalent. Okay, so equivalent fractions can be tricky, but at this stage it's worth learning that a half and 2/4 are equivalent. They are the same. Just a couple more challenges before we move on today. Have a look at the circles at the top. It says, which shape is the odd one out? Okay, well, the green shape, the circle that has got a shaded green part, that shows, well, there are 2 parts altogether. So 2 is my denominator, and 1 of them is shaded. What about this circle though? How many parts are there altogether? Well, there are 1, 2, 3 parts altogether, and 1 of them is shaded. And this circle shows 1, 2, 3, 4 parts altogether, and 2 of them are shaded. So in fact we've got a circle that is showing a half, a circle that is showing a third, and a circle that is showing 2/4. Now we've just learned that a half and 2/4 are equivalent, and actually we can see that from the pictures. This circle, the amount shaded is the same, although in a different orientation, to this circle and the amount that has been shaded. But with a third, there is a smaller amount that has been shaded. So the third is the odd one out. Okay, moving on to the challenge at the bottom. It says, if I put, this is the farmer speaking, if I put half of my cows in one field and 2/4 of my cows in another, I'll have the same number of cows in each field. Is he correct? Prove it. Well, we could perhaps pretend there are 12 cows. So, doing the same thing, we could say, well, a half of the 12 cows, a half of 12, what do you think that makes? Yes, you're right, it's 6. Half of 12 is 6. 2/4 of 12. If you're not convinced yet that a half is the same as 2/4, let's just try it out. So I'm going to draw 4 circles, because I've got 4 on the denominator. I'm going to share out my 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And then I'm going to see how many are in 2 of my circles. So in 2 of the circles I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all counting threes, 3, 6. The answer is also 6. So he's right. If he puts half of his cows in one field and 2/4 of his cows in another field, he will have the same number of cows in each field. Okay, moving on to today's activity. There's a sheet for you to download. Is a half the same as 2/4? So have a go at this activity and see how you get on. The top half is quite straightforward, although when you get to this question here and this one here, you'll notice it's asking you to colour 2/4 of the shapes, but you've got more than 4 parts, so let's just look at that together. Okay, if you're being asked to colour 2/4 of a shape, but it has more than 4 parts, let's have a look at this. Okay, so this shape has got far more than 4 parts. So what I need to do is I need to find a way, first of all, of splitting this shape equally into 4 parts. Looking at this shape, I can see that my best way of splitting this shape into 4 parts would be to take each row 1, 2, 3, 4 parts, and then I would colour 2 of them. 1, 2. Or even just remember that 2/4 is the same as a half, and you might be able to very easily shade in a half of any shape, regardless of how many parts there are. Good luck with that part of the question. The bottom part of the sheet is like the cows and the farmer. You have cats and you have to colour a half of them, colour a half of the birds, colour a half of the fish. And then on the second page you have the same animals, but this time you have to shade or colour 2/4 of them. But remember, a half is equivalent to 2/4. The challenge there is the bottom of the sheet. You can use these strips to help you if you need to, or show your fraction of a number using circles. If you want a real challenge today, then you could move on to the missing numbers sheet. Now this activity is taking you a little bit further with your learning. Now this time the sheet says a half of something equals 7. A half of something equals 7. Now they've been very helpful and they've shown you that a half of this whole number is 7. So they've put 7 dots in one half. If we were to fill in 7 dots in the second half, we would then actually be able to calculate that altogether we had 14 dots. So actually a half of 14 equals 7. And just like with addition and subtraction, where they're the inverse, they're the opposite, halving and doubling are also opposite. So actually if I doubled 7, I would get 14. It's trickier when you look at thirds, but again, they've said a third of something equals 6. So they've drawn 3 circles or 3 boxes, because the denominator on the fraction is 3, and they've put 6 into one of those boxes. So we could fill in the other 2. And then we could count up how many dots we have altogether. Or if you know your 6 times table, you could count in 6s. 6, 12, 18. So I could find that a third of 18 equals 6. Okay, so what you need to do is for each of these questions, complete the diagram with the same number of dots in each box, and then count up to find out how many there are altogether to work out the missing number. Good luck with that, and I'll see you next time.